The receiver felt cold against his ear, a stark, plastic conduit for the words that were methodically dismantling his world. Arthur Pendleton stood in the center of his small, tidy living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. He listened, his face a stoic mask, as the voice on the other end, a voice he had taught to speak, to form words of love and respect, now delivered a verdict with the casual cruelty of a stranger. "I'm getting married tomorrow, Dad," Leo said, his tone a bizarre mix of feigned excitement and brittle impatience. "It's all very sudden, but when you know, you know. Her name is Chloe. You'd like her, but, well, things are moving fast." Arthur said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was a fortress, a place where the shrapnel of other people's words could not reach the core of him. He listened to the rustle of what sounded like expensive fabric on the other end of the line, the distant clink of ice in a glass. A word away. "So, listen," Leo continued, the forced bonhomie evaporating, replaced by a sharp, transactional edge. "I needed to sort a few things out. To get started right, you know. Mr. Harrington, Chloe's father, is a big deal. He expects a certain level. So, I took care of it. The car and the house are sold. The money's being rolled into an investment portfolio set up for US. It's for the best. A clean break." Arthur's gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, to the silver-framed photograph of his late wife, Eleanor. Her smile was the only source of genuine warmth in the room. A clean break. The words echoed in the profound quiet of his home, a home that was apparently no longer his. He didn't speak of the memories embedded in the walls, of the spot on the driveway where he taught Leo to ride a bike, of the garden Eleanor attended with such love. Those things had no value in his son's new currency. To his son, it was a ghost, a relic from a past that needed to be paved over and forgotten. It was just an old man with a slight limp and quiet habits, a source of second-hand embarrassment. But Leo, in his rush to build a new life on the foundations of the old, had never bothered to look closely at his father. He'd never wondered about the faded, blue-black ink on his father's forearm, a symbol that was almost invisible now but one that generals would have once saluted and that enemies whispered about in fear. He'd never questioned the source of the silence, the discipline, the unnerving stillness his father possessed. To Leo, it was just Dad. Old, quiet, irrelevant Dad. The call ended with a hasty, meaningless "EAB in touch," and the line went dead. Arthur slowly lowered the phone, placing it back in its cradle with a precision that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. He did not scout. He did not weep. He simply stood in the echoing silence of his stolen life, the weight of his son's betrayal settling upon him like a shroud. "Welcome to our channel. We believe that behind every face lies a story, and that true strength is often found not in the noise of the world, but in the quiet dignity of the human heart. If you've ever felt overlooked or misunderstood, if you believe in the power of honor and the ultimate triumph of truth, then you're in the right place. Join our community of story lovers by subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. The story you are about to witness is a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms or seek recognition. Sometimes, they are the quiet old men the world has forgotten, waiting for a moment when their true character must, at last, be revealed. Arthur's life was a steady in quiet routine, a carefully constructed fortress against the chaos he had once known. He was a man of rituals. Up at 0500, not because an alarm clock screamed, but because his internal clock, forward in years of relentless discipline, knew no other way. A single cup of black coffee, strong and bitter. He would stand by the window, watching the world wake up, his thoughts his own. His small apartment, the one he moved into after Eleanor's passing, was sparse but immaculate. A single bed, made with military corners. A small shelf of books, mostly history and philosophy. And the photo of Eleanor. That was it. No trophies, no medals, no mementos from the other life. Those were buried deep, both physically and metaphorically. They belonged to a man who, for all intents and purposes, no longer existed. To the world, it was Arthur Pendleton, a part-time janitor at the local university, the man who silently emptied trash cans and mopped floors while students buzzed past, their minds on exams and weekend parties, never once giving him a second glance. They saw an old man with a noticeable limp, a souvenir from a training accident, Edeon told a curious colleague. His face was a road map of lines etched by time and hardship, but his eyes, a clear, pale gray, held a depth that could be unsettling if you looked too alone. They were eyes that had seen too much, that held a permanent watch. E never can plan. Not about the chain his leg when the weather turned cold, not about the casual condescension of a professor who missed walking for a piece of the furniture, not about the profound, aching loneliness that had been his constant companion since Eleanor was gone. She had been his anchor, the one person who knew the whole truth, the one who had seen the man behind the myth. She had loved both the soldier and the quiet man who came home, and she had been the bridge between him and Leo. With her gone, that bridge had crumbled, and the chasm between father and son had grown into an impassable canyon. He remembered Leo as a boy, full of wonder, looking at his father with an vast adoration. But as Leo grew, that adoration could lead into something else. He saw his friends, fathers, lawyers and bankers in sharp suits, driving luxury cars. And he saw his own father, a man who worked with his hands, who spoke in short, clipped sentences, who seemed content with a simple, unremarkable life. Sam began to plant its toxic seeds. It started with small things, not wanting Arthur to come to parente a chair conferences, introducing him as a government contractor, retired. Then it grew. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits, when they happened, were strand and brief, filled with Leo's talk of deals and opportunities, a language Arthur didn't speak. Leo craved the things Arthur disdained, status, wealth, the approval of strangers. He had no understanding of a world where a man's worth was measured by his worth, his loyalty, his willingness to stand on the line for the man next to him. Now, Leo was marrying into that world. The Harringtons. Arthur had heard the name. Richard Harrington was a real estate tycoon, a man whose face was often in the financial pages, a titan of industry known for his ruthlessness. His daughter, Chloe, was, from the pictures Leo had reluctantly shown him, a perfect product of that world, polished, beautiful, and possessing an air of unsaqueable entitlement. They were a dynasty of glass and steel, and in their world, a quiet old janitor was not a foundation. It was a crack in the facade, a blemish to be scrubbed away. Arthur picked up the framed photo of Eleanor. "Is getting married, he whispered, his voice rough with disuse. I think you need to go see him. It wasn't about the house or the car. Those were just things, and they had learned to live without things. It was about a promise he had made to her. On her deathbed. Watch over our boy, Arthur. He's lost. Help him find his way. He didn't know how he could do that now, but he knew he had to try. He had to stand his post. It was the only thing they knew how to do. The phone call was a surgical strike, delivered with cold precision. Arthur found himself replying Leo's words, not with anger, but with a kind of detached analysis, as if studying an enemy's strategy. "It's all handled, Dad." The casual finality of it was the most brutal part. Not, "I need your help," or, "Let's discuss this." Just a declaration. A disposition of assets. His assets. His life. The money is invested. In my future. Leo had spoken the word, future, as if it were a sacred, untouchable thing, a concept so grand it justified any collateral damage. Arthur's past, their shared history, had become that damage. He put on his worn but clean jacket, the fabric thin against the evening chill, and walked a few blocks to the small house he had on the Cayette home. He turned the corner onto the familiar, trail-lined street, and his steps faltered. There it was, stark and deep-seen against the manicured lawn Eleanor had so loved. A large, garish sign with a single, brutal word in bold red letters, sold. It was a gravestone for a life. He stood on the public sidewalk, a stranger looking at his own history. He could see the ghost of Eleanor pruning her roses by the porch. He could hear the echo of a younger Leo's laughter as he chased a soccer ball across that very lawn. He could feel the memory of carrying his son, asleep, through the front door after a long day at the park. His memory was now a trespass. He walked up the path, his limp more pronounced than usual, and reached for the doorknob. His hand stopped. The lock was new, a shiny, brassy thing that glinted in the fading light. His key, the one he had carried for 30 years, was now just a useless piece of metal in his pocket. He had been locked out of his own life. Another, Mrs. Gable from across the street, peered out her window, her face a mixture of pity and curiosity. She had always been kind. She probably thought he was losing his mind, an old man staring at a house no longer owned. He gave her a smile, tight nod of acknowledgement and turned away. The finality of it all settled not as a hot dry, but as a cold, dense weight in his chest. This was it. The culmination of years of drifting apart, of a son slowly and deliberately erasing his father from the ledger of his life. Yet, even in the face of this profound betrayal, a deeper instinct took hold. A father's duty. It was a concept as old and as elemental as the earth itself. It wasn't transactional. It wasn't conditional. It simply was. He had to see his son. He had to witness this moment, this transition, even if it was an unwelcome specter at the feast. It wasn't about confronting Leo or demanding an explanation. Explanations were irrelevant. The actions were all that mattered. No, this was about something else. It was about bearing witness. It was about fulfilling his promise to Eleanor. He will watch over him. He would not let his son take this final, monumental step into a new life completely alone, even if Leo himself had orchestrated that very solitude. He would be there, a silent observer in the back, a ghost holding vigil. He went back to his small apartment and looked up the wedding announcement online. The Harrington Pendleton wedding. The venue was the Oakwood Grand, a country club so exclusive its name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the city's society circles. It was a world away, not just in distance, but in spirit. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. An old man in a threadbare jacket. He had faced down warlords in forgotten corners of the world. He had walked through fear and endured things that would break lesser men. But the prospect of facing the palest contempt of his son's new family felt like a different kind of battlefield, one for which he had no armor. But duty was duty. He would go. He would stand his post. He would watch over the boy, even if the boy was now a man who wished him gone. He would be the unseen sentinel, the silent guardian, fulfilling a promise made to the only person whose opinion had ever truly mattered. The journey to the Oakwood Grand was a pilgrimage across class lines. Arthur stood at the bus stop, the city's grime and noise a familiar cloak. The bus wheeled to a halt, and he climbed the board, dropping his coins into the box with a quiet clink. He sat by a window smeared with fingerprints, watching the landscape of his life transform. The modest brick buildings and corner stores of his neighborhood gave way to sprawling suburban tracts, which in turn dissolved into rolling green hills and gated communities. Each mile was a step further away from his world and deeper into Leo's. Finally, the bus let him off at a lone, winding road with no sidewalk. A small, elegant sign set the entrance to the club. A vegan DeLong walked up the asphalt drive, a solitary, limping figure against a backdrop of breathtaking opulence. Luxury cars whispered past him, their occupants casting fleeting, curious glances at the old man in the worn jacket. It was an anomaly, a glitch in the perfect tapestry of their day. At the main gate, a formidable stone structure manned by two security guards in crisp uniforms, his journey came to an abrupt halt. "Can I help you, sir?" one of the guards asked, his tone professionally polite but his eyes holding a clear message. "You do not belong here." "I'm here for the wedding," Arthur said, his voice calm and even. "The Harrington Pendleton wedding." The guard consulted a tablet. He scrolled, his brow furrowed. "I don't have a Pendleton on the guest list. Only the groom." "I'm his father," Arthur stated simply. The guard's professional mask slipped. A flicker of derision crossed his face, quickly suppressed. He looked at Arthur's simple clothes, his worn-out shoes, his tired face. The idea was, to him, ludicrous. "Right. Look, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move alone. This is a private event." "I am the groom's father," Arthur repeated, not with anger, but with the flat insistence of a man stating an undeniable fact. Just then, a low-slung, cherry-red sports car purred to a stop beside them. The window glided down, revealing Leo behind the wheel, looking impassively handsome and uncomfortable in a tailored tuxedo. In the passenger seat, a vision in silk and pearls, was Chloe. She looked at Arthur as if it were a piece of refuse that had blown onto their pristine driveway. "Dad!" Leo's voice was a strained whisper, last with fury and mortification. What are you doing here? I thought I told you. I got out of the car, shutting the door with a soft, expensive thud. I walked over to Arthur, his movements stiff with anger. You can't be here. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing Chloe. Chloe didn't even deign to look at them. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched. Leo, just handle it, she said, her voice like chipping ice. My father will be here any minute. The words struck Leo like a whip. He turned to the guard, his face a mask of false charm. My apologies, he said, pulling a wad of cash from his pocket and pressing it into the guard's hand. Es a little confused. Just make sure stash of the property. Handle it. Quietly. Leo didn't look at his father again. He got back in his car and sped away toward the grand clubhouse, leaving Arthur standing in a cloud of dust and humiliation. The guard, his palm now heavier and his demeanor colder, stepped in front of Arthur. You heard him, the guard said, his voice now devoid of any pretense of respect. Time to go, Rambo. The party's over for you. Arthur didn't move. He just stood there, his grey eyes fixed on the distant building where his son was about to play his life to a world that demanded the sacrifice of his own father. The weight in his chest grew heavier, but his spine remained straight. He had a duty to perform. He would find another way in. Arthur was relegated to the periphery, a ghost haunting the edges of the celebration. The security guard, emboldened by Leo's cash and contempt, had pointed him toward the service entrance. If you're not gone in 5 minutes, I'm calling the cops, he snarled. So Arthur waited, standing by a set of dumpsters, the smell of discarded food a stark contrast to the fragrant blossoms spilling from the club's immaculate gardens. He stood with a stillness that was both unsettling and profound, a rock in the swirling stream of service staff rushing in and out. It was here that he met Sarah. She was young, maybe 23, with a clipboard clasped in her hand and a frantic look in her eyes. She was the assistant wedding planner, and the day was already threatening to spiral out of her control. She rushed out for a breath of fresh air and saw him, this quiet, sad-eyed old man standing with such solemn dignity by the garbage bins. He didn't fit. He wasn't a vagrant, not with that look in his eye. He wasn't a staff. He was something else. Are you all right, sir? She asked, her voice a small kindness in a day of sharp commands. Arthur turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting hers. Just watching, he said. You're not with the wedding, are you? She asked hesitantly. I am the groom's father, he replied, the words simple, unadorned. Sarah's eyes widened. She had seen the groom, Leo, al charm and expensive cologne. She had met his new father-in-law, the formidable M.R. Harrington. This quiet, humbly dressed man did not compute. But she saw the truth in his eyes. And she saw the pain. Oh, she said softly. I didn't know. Before she could say more, a new figure appeared. Richard Harrington, a mountain of a man in a perfectly tailored suit, his face florid with power and privilege. He had seen Arthur from a window and had come to deal with the Yesore himself. What is this? He boomed, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. He didn't address Arthur directly, but spoke to the nearest security guard. He talked him made it clear. I want this property clear of any distractions. Get that riff-raff away from my daughter's wedding. Now. The guard, eager to please the tycoon, turned on Arthur, his face a mask of aggression. You were told to leave, he shouted, grabbing Arthur's arm to stab him. It was a mistake. The guard was younger, bigger, stronger. But the moment his hand clamped down on Arthur's forearm, he felt as if he had grabbed a steel cable. The old man didn't even flinch. He just stood there, his body an immovable object. In the struggle, Arthur's worn jacket sleeve rode up past his wrist. And in that fleeting moment, Sarah saw it. A flash of faded ink on the weathered skin of his forearm. It was a tattoo, old and blurred by time, but the image was still discernible. A snarling, three-headed dog. It was a strange, menacing symbol, and it seared itself into her memory. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was no ordinary old man. The guard, unnerved by Arthur's unyielding stillness, stabbed harder. Arthur stumbled, not from the force, but to the escalate, his limp more pronounced as he caught his balance. That's a no. Sarah cried out, stepping between them. She turned to the guard and Mr. Harrington, her voice cracking but firm. "Es with me. Es part of the temporary clean-up crew. I hired him for the post-event breakdown. I was just giving him his instructions." Harrington gave her a withering look, then glanced at Arthur in disgust. "Fine. Just keep him in the back. I don't want to see his face again." Span on his heel and stalked back toward the party, his purpose served. Sarah let out a long, sticky breath and turned to Arthur. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Thank you," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. He looked not at her, but toward the grand ballroom, from which the faint sounds of celebratory music were beginning to drift. His son was in there. And he was now, officially, on the clean-up crew for his own son's life. The ballroom of the Oakwood Grand was a cathedral of Bealt. Crystal chandeliers, as the scythe of a small car, dripped light onto tables groaning under the weight of silver, china, and exotic flowers. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the self-congratulatory murmur of the 1%. And in a dark, secluded corner, near a service door and partially hidden by a large potted fern, stood Arthur Pendleton. Sarah had kept her word, finding him a spot where a cold remained unseen, a silent promise in her eyes that she would not betray him. From his shadowy alcove, he watched. He was a master of observation, a skill honed in places far deadlier than this. He saw his son, Leo, moving through the crowd, a perfect chameleon in his new habitat. He laughed at the right jokes, his hand possessively on Chloe's back, his eyes shining with the thrill of acceptance. He was playing a part, and playing it well. Arthur felt no anger, only a profound, hallowing sadness. The boy he had raised, the boy who had once believed in simple things like honesty and love, was gone. In his place was this polished stranger, a man who had traded his soul for a seat at the table. The ceremony began. Arthur watched as Chloe, a visioning wit, walked down the aisle on her father's arm. He watched as Leo took her hand, his smile broad and brilliant for the cameras. He listened to the officiant speak of love, honor, and fidelity, and the words felt like ashes in the air. Honor. What did these people know of honor? To them, it was a word to be used in speeches, a decorative flourish. For Arthur, honor was a physical thing. It was the weight of a dying comrade in your arms. It was the silence you kept to protect others. It was the promise you made to a woman you loved, a promise to watch over her son, even as he broke your heart. His mind drifted back to Eleanor. He could almost feel her presence beside him, her hand slipping into his. "Is lost, Arthur," she would have whispered. "So very lost." He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on her memory. Her face, her smile, the unwavering belief steadied in the goodness that lay dormant somewhere inside their son. He was here for her. He was standing this post, in this ridiculous, appealant room, as a final act of devotion to her memory. He would bear witness. He would fulfill his duty. The vows were exchanged, a flurry of idos that sealed the merger of the Pendleton name and the Harrington fortune. A smattering of polite, restrained applause. As the couple kissed, a wave of nausea washed over Arthur. It was the sight of his son, so completely absorbed in the lie he had created, that felt like the deepest betrayal of all. He watched as they walked back down the aisle, smiling and waving at faces that were not family, not friends, but strategic allies in the world of commerce and status. Leo's eyes scanned the crowd, soaking in the adoration, the envy. His gaze swept right past the dark corner where his father stood, seeing nothing. To Leo, Arthur was not there. He had been successfully deleted. The reception began, the volume in the room rising to a dull roar of champagne-fueled chatter. Arthur remained in his corner, a statue carved from shadow and sorrow. The air grew thick with tension, a feeling unwell. It was the calm before the storm, the electric stillness before the first shot is fired. He didn't know how, but he knew this charade was not destined to end quietly. The universe, in his experience, had a way of balancing its books. And a debt of honor had been incurred. A debt that would, sooner or later, have to be paid. The reception was in full, boisterous swing. Waters weaved through the crowd with trash of champagne and canapés. A stringed quartet played Vivaldi, their beautiful music reduced to background noise. Richard Harrington, His face flushed with triumph and expensive scotch, stood at the podium, a microphone in his hand. He tapped it, and a wave of expectant silence fell over the room. Friends, family, a vegan, his voice booming with manufactured warmth. What a day! What a glorious day! A beam that his daughter and his new son in love. Yeah, to be honest, when my Chloe first brought Leo home, it was skeptical punto. A ripple of knowing laughter. He didn't come from our world. But he saw something in him. He saw ambition. He saw a young man willing to do whatever it takes to leave the past behind and build a real future. He has good breeding, a willingness to shed old skin for new. And in my world, that's what matters. The insult was as subtle as a sledgehammer, and it was aimed directly at the shadows. Leo smiled, a tight, forced smile. He knew his part. He was the boy who had escaped his meager origins. He was the success story. Suddenly, the grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. They didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that made the crystal on the tables tremble. The chatter died instantly. All heads turned. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light of the grand hall, was a figure of such commanding presence that the air itself seemed to grow thin. It was a man in his late 60s, from Broad Street, in the immaculate full-dress uniform of a four-star general of the United States Army. His chest was a constellation of ribbons and medals, a testament to a lifetime of service and conflict. His face was granite, and his eyes, cold and clear, swept the room with an authority that was absolute and terrifying. Flanking him, standing just inside the doorway, were two other men. They were not in uniform, but in sharp, dark suits. They stood with a relaxed stillness that was more menacing than any overt threat. Their eyes were constantly moving, assessing, identifying. They moved with the lethal, economic grace of men who lived on the knife-edge. The general's polished black boots clicked with rhythmic, devastating slowness on the marble floor as he began to walk into the room. He ignored the stunned faces of the guests. He ignored Richard Harrington, who stood at the podium with his mouth agape. His gaze was a laser, searching the crowd, scanning every corner, until it found what it was looking for. He stopped, his eyes locking onto the dark alcove, onto the old man in the worn-out jacket. A haze fell over the room, so profound it was as if all the sound had been vacuumed out. The general's focus was so intense, so singular, that every single person in the room turned to follow his gaze. They looked into the shadows and saw, for the first time, the janitor. The ghost. Arthur Pendleton. The general began to walk again, his path now direct and unwavering, straight toward Arthur's corner. The woman Sea of the wedding party parted before a massive by in command. This was not a man you got in the way of. This was a man who's kept history, a man for whom precedent stood. And they was walking towards the help. The general moved with a purpose that was terrifying in its clarity. Richard Harrington, recovering his senses, took a step forward from the podium. General, I'm Richard Harrington. What an unexpected honor. His voice trailed off as the general held up a single, gloved hand without so much as a glance in his direction. The gesture was not a request, but a command. Harrington was dismissed. He fell silent, his face turning a shade of purple. Leo, seeing his carefully constructed world beginning to fracture, intercepted the general just before he reached Arthur's corner. General Thorne, sir. I'm Leo Pendleton. I don't believe we've met. General Marcus Thorne stopped. He looked down at the young man in the tuxedo, his eyes as cold as a winter sky. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply looked through him. Then, he stepped around him as if he were a piece of furniture and continued his final few steps until he stood directly in front of Arthur. In the dead silence of the opulent ballroom, surrounded by the wealthiest and most powerful people in the city, the four-star general, a living legend in the armed forces, snapped to attention. He raised his hand in a salute so crisp, so perfect, it seemed to cut the air. He held it, his gaze locked on the old janitor's face, a look of profound, unwavering respect in his eyes. The room held its breath. Arthur, his own face a mask of weary resignation, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was the slightest of movements, but it was enough. General Thorne lowered his salute. He turned, not to Arthur, but to the stunned, silent crowd. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried with the force of a shockwave, reaching every corner of the room. It was told he might find a ghost here today, a vegan, his voice calm, measured, and laced with steel. For 20 years, the official record has stated that the man you see before you died on a desolate mountainside in a country that don't appear on most maps. We carved his name onto a wall of heroes. We mourned him. We told his wife he was gone. Unnecessarily to protect a man who had become a legend in a world you people can't even imagine. He turned his head slightly, his glacial eyes landing on Leo. You, he said, the single word a quiet indictment. You stand there in your $1,000 suit, celebrating your ambition. Spat the word as if it tasted foul. You speak of leaving the past behind. Let me tell you about the past you were so eager to discard. Let me tell you about the man you call father. The general's monologue began, and it was a symphony of valor. This man's name is not Arthur Pendleton. That is the name we gave him when we buried him. He's calcine was Cerberus. He was the sergeant major of a unit that don't exist, Task Force Cerberus. A unit so secret, even acknowledging its name is a treasonable offense. He don't have a file. He has a vault at the Pentagon. On-screen text would begin to flash, start with the letters against a black background. Classified. Top secret. Eyes only. You see his limp, the general continued, his voice rising with controlled passion. I got that on Operation Nightfall, dragging 3 wounded men, myself included, to mile-stroke enemy territory after our helicopter went down. I took 3 bullets to his leg but never stopped. We are alive today because if just to let us die. More text, Silver Star. Purple Art, 3. You see the scar over his eye? A gift from an enemy interrogator in a black site prison. I spent 6 months in that hole. I gave them nothing. Not his name, not his rank, nothing. The only thing I did was orchestrate an escape, freeing 12 other prisoners and walking out the front gate. Text, Prisoner of War Medal. Legion of Merit. And for his final act, before we had to make him a ghost for his own safety, a single and deadly averted a catastrophe that would have cost thousands of civilian lives. An act of such profound bravery, of such complete self-sacrifice, that the President awarded him the Medal of Honor. In secret, of course, a medal he never wears. A medal he probably keeps in a sack drawer. The camera would do a slow zoom on Arthur's stoic face as the text appeared. Medal of Honor. The general took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. This man, this janitor, this embarrassment, is one of the greatest heroes this country has ever produced. He has stood on the line between darkness and light his entire life, asking for nothing in return. Not fame. Not wealth. Only silence. A silence he sounds so fit to desecrate. The general's final words soon in the air, dense and heavy, suffocating the last bit of oxygen in the room. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound. It was a living entity, a physical presence pressing down on every person in the ballroom. It was the silence of scam, of awe, of a world turned completely upside down. Sarah, the young wedding planner, stood by the service door, tears streaming silently down her face. The image of the 3-headed dog tattoo clicked into place. Cerberus, the mythical guardian of the underworld. It all made sense. The stillness, the quiet dignity, the eyes that had seen everything. She was looking at a legend. All eyes were on Leo. His handsome face, moments ago so full of smug triumph, had collapsed. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a sickly, pallid gray. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from the towering, decorated general to the quiet old man in the janitor's clothes. His father. A stranger. A hero. The lie had built his entire life upon had been vaporized in a single, devastating monologue. He looked at his new wife, Chloe. Her face was a mask of cold horror. She was not looking at him, but at Arthur, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of shock and damning reverence. The foundation of her world, built on status and appearances, had just been obliterated by a truth she couldn't possibly comprehend. Her father, Richard Harrington, looked as if he had been physically struck. His blustering, overbearing confidence was gone, replaced by the slack-habit disbelief of a man who was used in the laws of physics suspended. A titan of industry, a man who thought he ruled the world, was a mere footnote in the presence of the quiet man he had dismissed as riff-raff. General Thorne turned his back on the crowd, his dismissal of them complete. A fast Arthur, his expression softening from granite to something approaching brotherly affection. The house and the car were never his to say, the general said, his voice now low and calm, but carrying clearly in the unnatural quiet. He directed the words at Leo, who flinched as if struck. They were held in a secure trust, managed by the Department of Defense for one of its most valued, and vulnerable, assets. The sales have been voided. The accounts have been frozen. A federal investigation into attempted fraud against a protected government operative is, unpleasant. A placid firm, gentle hand on Arthur's shoulder. The two men who flanked the general moved forward, now standing on either side of Arthur, forming a small, impenetrable honor guard. It's over, Sergeant Major, Thorne said softly. The threat has been neutralized. It's time to come home. Arthur looked up, his weary grey eyes meeting the general's. He then turned his head and looked at his son, one last time. There was no anger in his gaze. There was no "I told you so." There was only a vast, bottomless ocean of pity. A sorrow for the boy who had gotten so lost he had sold his own soul for nothing. Without another word, Arthur turned. With General Thorne at his side and the two silent professionals as his escort, he began to walk. His limp was still there, a permanent reminder of his sacrifice, but his back was straight. He walked with the quiet dignity of a king, leaving the scandals of his son's wedding and the wreckage of his scam life behind him. The crowd parted for them once more, thirst and faces a gallery of awe and regret. He walked out of the ballroom, out of the darkness and into the light, leaving silence in his wake. The aftermath was a quiet implosion. The party was over. Guests began to slip away, whispering amongst themselves, desperate to escape the toxic atmosphere of scam that now filled the opulent room. The stringed quartet had packed their instruments. The champagne was left all drunk on the tables. The wedding cake, a towering monument to a failed union, stood untouched. The Harrington Pendleton wedding would be remembered not for its glamour, but for its spectacular, public humiliation. Leo was left standing alone in the middle of the ballroom floor, a groom without a bride, a son without a father. Chloe had taken one last look at him, her eyes full of a contempt so pure it was frightening, and had walked away without a word, her father trailing behind her, already on the phone with his lawyers. Leo was a pariah, a fraud exposed. He had traded his father's quiet honor for a world of glittering surfaces, and in one swift, brutal moment, he had been left with nothing. The story became a quiet legend in certain circles, a cautionary tale about judging a book by its cover. It was a reminder that true value, real honor, is not found in a bank statement or a fancy title. It is founded in fear, measured in sacrifice, and often lives in the quietest corners of the world, unseen and uncelebrated. It is about who you are when no one is watching, what you are willing to give when you have nothing left to lose. Our final scene is not in the ballroom of the damned, but in a simple, sunlit room. It's a comfortable space, provided by a grateful nation for one of its quiet heroes. It looks out over a calm lake, the morning mist rising from the water. Arthur Pendleton stands by the window, a simple ceramic mug of coffee in his hands. He is wearing a plain shirt and comfortable pants. There are no medals on his chest. There is no uniform. He is simply a man at peace. The limp is still there. The memories are still there. But the profound, aching loneliness has wrecked, replaced by a quiet sense of belonging. His honor, which was never truly lost, has been restored to its rightful place. He never sought vindication, but it found him anyway. He watches the sun climb over the horizon, panting the sky in hues of orange and gold. He takes a slow sip of his coffee. He remains the same humble, stoic man he has always been. He has returned from the cold. He is, at last, home. What do you believe is the true measure of a person's character? Is it the wealth they accumulate, the status they achieve, or the silent sacrifices they make for others? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. We read everyone. For more stories that celebrate the unsung heroes and the quiet strength of the human spirit, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.